What's up, dudes and dudettes? It's me, Pygmalion, that old dude who invented the triangle. Today, we are going to be talking about pandas, which you may have deduced by looking at the thumbnail or title. Specifically, we're talking about the giant panda, as opposed to the red panda or lesser panda. And we are going to be needlefelting this guy. Needlefelting is sculpting with wool by stabbing it a bunch of times to tangle it up into a mass. In this case, the mass will end up looking like a panda. So, let's get into it. So the black and white panda, or the giant panda, or just the panda, or the panda bear, is indeed a bear. I guess it was under debate for a while whether they were raccoons or bears for some reason. I'm not entirely sure what characteristics they shared. Within the Wikipedia article, there was not like a citation for the precise characteristics they shared with raccoons. I don't know, I think someone was just making stuff up. The reason there might have been some sort of confusion is that the family Ursidae is somewhat close to Musteloideae, you know, the family that's made up of weasels and raccoons and stuff. And between these two families, raccoons are more closely related to bears. Indeed, raccoons are more closely related to bears than even red pandas are. Giant pandas are true bears. They are part of the family Ursidae, and yes, this does mean that they're part of the order Carnivora. We'll get into that later. The giant panda is native to a tiny sliver of south-central China, specifically in the Sichuan Basin. This is a really interesting geographical feature. It's this recessed crater that's completely encircled by mountains. There's very few other places in the world like it, and since it's this whole basin, there's so much runoff from the mountains that it's an incredibly fertile region. In modern day, almost 100 million people live just in that basin, and that area is essentially China's breadbasket. So since their native range has varying elevations, there's a couple of different flavors of pandas that live at various elevations. The normal one is black and white. That's the one that lives just around the Sichuan Basin, and then there's the sort of sepia-toned one that lives up in higher elevations in the mountains. That's a light brown and white. Pandas have incredibly distinctive markings. Scientists aren't entirely sure why these markings are the way that they are. There's some hypotheses it could be a sort of camouflage. Pandas live in a wooded environment that's covered in rock and snow, so their markings could give the illusion that they're just another shadow on the snow. One hypothesis surrounding their eye patches is that they could help pandas identify one another. They could act kind of like panda fingerprints, except eye prints. However, I'm not sure how much credence this hypothesis necessarily has, because pandas are not known to be highly social animals. To me, it doesn't make sense that they would have these identifying markings when they don't have much of a need to identify each other for socialization. Another reason those black eye marks could be there is to protect their eyes from the sun, kind of like the way football players paint black streaks under their eyes. Meerkats have similar markings. Besides for their markings, another defining characteristics of pandas is, of course, their rotundity. They're very pudgy, they're very round, they're very fat. It's incredible. This low surface area to volume ratio is indicative of a lower metabolic rate. If you look at a big herbivore like the gorilla, you'll also notice this pudginess. The reason this is indicative of a lower metabolism is because a lower surface area to volume ratio means that there's less room on their body for heat to escape, so they don't need to expend as much energy on maintaining homeostasis. And of course, a lower metabolic rate allows pandas to subsist on lower quality food, like bamboo. It should come as no surprise that pandas are a fan of bamboo, but I was surprised that it made up literally 99% of their diet. Like, pandas eat so much bamboo that they evolved a thumb specifically to hold on to bamboo while they're eating it. That would be like if humans ate so many Hot Pockets that they developed calluses on their tongue to protect themselves from the magma-like interior of freshly warmed up Hot Pockets. Remember how I said that pandas are in the order Carnivora? Yeah, they pretty much still have the bodies of carnivores. Like, their digestive tract is super short, which is typical of carnivores. Cows have a digestive tract that's like 20 times longer than its entire body. And cows, of course, have multiple stomachs. They're ruminants. But an average carnivore, like a dog, has a digestive tract that's only 6 times longer than its body. So carnivores are not built for intense digestion that plant matter needs, since plant matter has really tough molecules to digest, like cellulose. Bamboo is so nutritionally poor, a panda has to eat around 20 to 30 pounds of bamboo per day to get enough energy. For reference, an average panda is around 275 pounds. So pandas are eating 10% of their body weight in bamboo per day. That would be like if an average-sized man was eating 20 pounds of hot dogs in a day. So obviously with this super short digestive tract and the amount of matter that pandas are shoving through this digestive tract, they're pooping a lot. Like, pandas are pooping 40 times a day. And honestly, besides for pooping and sleeping, pandas don't do much else. They're pretty much solitary animals except for when the mothers are raising cubs. And speaking of the cubs, they come out of mom around 1/800th of her body weight. This is the smallest baby to mom size ratio in all placental mammals. So this really tells you how nutritionally poor bamboo is for pandas. Oh, and the cubs don't come out of mom being able to digest bamboo. No, it's not that they just need to be weaned first. Like, their guts are sterile. They don't have the proper microbiome in place to digest bamboo. Because pandas never themselves evolved to be able to eat bamboo. They just eventually found symbiotic microbiomes that they invited into their gut that digest the bamboo for them. And they don't even do it effectively because their digestive tracts are so freaking short. So how does baby panda cultivate this microbiome in their gut? Does it come through the milk of mama panda? No, that would be way too easy. They just eat her poop. They eat her poop for like 6 months until they're able to eat bamboo. Like, for 6 months straight, they're eating poop and milk. They're eating like chocolate milkshakes every day. But good thing mom poops a lot, you know? And this really all begs the question of why pandas ever started eating bamboo in the first place. There's evidence to suggest that they started eating bamboo around 7 million years ago to supplement their diet, but that they were omnivorous until around 2 million years ago when they developed this symbiotic relationship with their gut microbes. We know that modern pandas no longer have umami taste receptors, you know, the umami flavor that makes meat taste good. So it's sort of a chicken or egg situation. Did pandas lose these umami taste receptors and then decide that meat tasted like garbage and were like, I'm gonna eat bamboo now? Or did they start eating so much bamboo that there was simply no need to waste energy on these umami taste receptors? I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows. What else is fun about pandas? Oh, they've been known to cover themselves in horse manure to protect themselves against the cold. Moving on. So pandas have always had cultural significance in China. In early Chinese dynasties, pandas were thought to be rare and noble creatures. Evidently, early Chinese scholars never saw pandas covering themselves in horse manure. Of course, the dragon is typically China's internal symbol for itself, like the bald eagle is in America, but internationally, the panda is seen as their national emblematic animal, the same way that internationally, America's national animal is the Big Mac. However, despite The panda's cultural significance in China, it wasn't until remarkably late that Westerners ever encountered pandas. As far as written records in the Western canon show, it wasn't until 1869. 1869, just so we're clear, is after Britain invaded China and stole Hong Kong, which happened in the 1840s. Were they hiding the pandas? I don't really know. And it wasn't for almost another 50 years that a Westerner was recorded having ever seen a live panda. In 1916, a German zoologist went over to China and purchased a panda cub. I guess he didn't have anything better to do during World War I. Honestly, if I was a German during World War I, I'd much rather be in China buying a panda cub than, in World War I. So I think this guy had the right idea. The first Westerners to ever shoot a panda are pretty much exactly who you'd expect. They were the sons of Theodore Roosevelt Jr. and Kermit Roosevelt. In 1936, the Brookfield Zoo in Chicago got their first panda, and the London Zoo shortly thereafter got a few pandas of its own in 1938. Unfortunately, one only lasted a couple of days and then was promptly taxidermized. Her name was Grandma. These first couple of pandas that were brought to Western zoos in the 1930s marked the beginning of a long and rich tradition of cultural interchange between the West and China, but only regarding pandas. Obviously, there was the Silk Road or whatever before then, but I think pandas is more important. Specifically, and this will be important later, this is between the People's Republic of China and other foreign powers. After the 1930s, a couple of things happened in the People's Republic of China, and pandas were unfortunately not their primary focus, but they started back up again in the 1970s, and they started giving people pandas as tokens of goodwill, essentially. By the time the 1980s rolled around, Mao was no longer alive, and the new heads of China were like, I guess we're less communist now, so we should care about money. And they started making people pay for pandas. And, oh boy, did they make people pay for pandas. China started loaning out pandas to zoos in 10-year intervals, and each year a zoo would have to pay China $1 million for each panda. And also, if there were any pandas born in captivity, they were the property of China. Look, all I'm saying is that in 1984, when China started loaning out pandas instead of giving them away for free, their GDP started really taking off. So, maybe they're onto something here. I'm sure there were no other influences besides for loaning out pandas for millions of dollars. Nothing else possibly could have happened. For the most part, this panda diplomacy has been mildly controversial in America because the American government gets mildly irritated when zoos are sending China millions of dollars for whatever reason. But that was slightly rectified in 1998. There was a lawsuit, and after this lawsuit, zoos were told that they had to prove that most of the money they were sending to China to rent out these pandas was going specifically to panda conservation. Otherwise, no panda. That was a pretty mild controversy, but it starts getting spicy in 2005. China, and let's be clear here, the People's Republic of China, offered to give a breeding pair of pandas to Taiwan. And Taiwan is simply the Republic of China. This is a big old can of worms. So, as you are likely aware, there's a bit of beef between Taiwan and the People's Republic of China. Both of these think they are the only China. They don't politically recognize each other. They think that they rule over all of the territory that is mainland China and the island of Taiwan both. The official position of the People's Republic of China, or mainland China, or what usually comes to mind when you think of just China, is that Taiwan is a rebellious province. Due to some technicalities with how the Civil War ended between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China in the 50s, The Republic of China or Taiwan still can kind of sort of claim that they legally have authority over both Taiwan and mainland China, and this is indeed their official position. So most people will just say, we're an independent country, that's all we really want to be. However, if Taiwan ever comes out and officially states we're seeking independence, then that would give the People's Republic of China an excuse to invade Taiwan, which may or may not eventually cause World War III, but all we care about right now is pandas. It was a little bit inappropriate, in my opinion, for the People's Republic of China to offer Taiwan pandas. The issue here is that this panda diplomacy is usually between foreign powers. It's usually between China and a foreign power. They're trying to give a token of goodwill. When this proposal was offered to Taiwan, it was just like, wait, hold on a second. Is this an international transfer of pandas, or is this a domestic transfer of pandas? Because there's slightly different rules around domestic transfers of pandas. Like, there aren't the big loans and stuff if it's just a Chinese zoo getting pandas. This was obviously controversial and complicated, and it didn't get better. There was a naming contest for these two pandas. So the two names that were proposed were Tuan Tuan and Yan Yan, and these two names were derived from the Chinese word Tuanyan, which means reunion or reunification. So that's a little bit spicy, I would say. It's not just these diplomatic reasons that pandas are controversial. So pandas in captivity are incredibly expensive to take care of. In 2005, the New York Times did a report and found that pandas were 5 times more expensive to take care of than the next expensive animal, which is the elephant. Of course, part of the cost that's incurred while taking care of pandas is paying China for the privilege of keeping these pandas in your zoo. But even without having to pay China, they have an incredibly expensive diet to maintain. Obviously, they're super picky eaters. They eat pretty specialized food. You can't just go and get them a pile of romaine from Winn-Dixie, you know? They have to eat bamboo, and they have to eat a lot of bamboo. And they're also pretty difficult to breed in captivity, and there's been a lot of expenditure trying to figure out how to make them breed. There's been some really stupid efforts, like they tried showing pandas videos of other pandas mating. Like they probably just saw some blobs moving and were like, I gotta go poop. They tried giving pandas Viagra. I don't really know why they thought that would work, because it was more the female that was the issue than the male. Female pandas are only in estrus or in heat and ovulating for 2 or 3 days out of the entire year. So if you don't artificially inseminate the panda in that tiny window of time, then you're not going to be having panda cubs that year. But besides for these efforts to get them to breed, there's been a lot of money that's gone into protecting pandas' habitat, which is both good and bad, but either way, it's been incredibly expensive. In 2020, the Giant Panda National Park in China was formed from nearly 70 nature reserves. It's 10,500 square miles, which is almost 3 times the size of Yellowstone National Park. Obviously, this is a huge victory for conservationists. This is a huge amount of space for animals besides just pandas to frolic around in and live their lives as they please. But it was also an endeavor that cost $1.5 billion US dollars. That's a lot of dollars. Was it a good use of the money? It's hard to say. I mean, this just happened last year. There's some people that argue that, yes, conserving panda habitat is great. They say that pandas act kind of like an umbrella species. This pretty much means that when you protect pandas' habitats, you also, as a byproduct, end up protecting the habitats of a lot of other smaller animals. Protecting panda habitat was estimated to conserve about 70% of the country's forest birds, about 70% of mammals, and 31% of amphibians. Others argue that pandas act like a charismatic animal. Charismatic animals in the conservation lingo are animals that you can show people and get them to donate money to conservation efforts. So think lions, think sea turtles, giraffes, dolphins, just animals that people really, really like. And then conservationists argue that all of this money that's being donated to help sea turtles and pandas will also end up being used to protect other important animals that people might not think are as cute. There might be some credence to this, but honestly, that just sounds like the conservation version of trickle-down economics to me. So I have a bit of a hard time buying it. Either way, call them charismatic animals, call them umbrella species. The money that's going to conserve pandas is not going to conserve other animals. The efforts to conserve pandas have been vindicated. Before conservation efforts in the 1980s really got started, the population of giant pandas was around 1,100 in the wild. But nowadays, estimates of their wild population put them anywhere between 1,500 and even as high as 3,000. And in the Giant Panda National Park alone, it's estimated that there's 1,800 wild giant pandas. These conservation efforts have been going so well that in 2016, the IUNC elevated their status from endangered to vulnerable. And earlier this year, in July of 2021, Chinese authorities also reclassified them to vulnerable. So these conservation efforts have proved fruitful to these stupid but adorable animals. Has this money been well spent? Could this money have been better spent? Maybe, but I mean, at least they're not endangered anymore, and now there's a huge national park in China, so seems like a victory to me. So let's cap this off with one final fun fact. If you're looking at an MRI scan and you spot the face of a giant panda in the middle of the brain, that's a sign that that brain has Wilson's disease. Very cool.
Alright, so there he is. This is how he turned out. Pretty cute, I'd say. I only stabbed myself about 8 times, but I think it was worth it for this incredible visage. I'm about 95% happy with how this turned out. Some of the proportions were a little bit off, but it's a little bit hard to predict how something will turn out after you add a bunch of fluff to it. The good thing about sculpting animals is that even if the proportions are a little bit off, it's not going to look uncanny valley. It's not going to look super creepy like if you mess up sculpting a human, which is why I like them. And also, they're very cute. So just a name for this guy. Not Tuan Tuan or Yan Yan. That's a little bit, it's a little bit too topical. Even though that happened about 15 years ago. Either way, don't do it. So, here he is. Thanks for watching. Peace out.